Okay.
Mr. Linder is the Austin branch manager of the NAACP. Mr. Linder?
Thank you. Let me add as well. I was born in Macon, Georgia in 1958. That's 7 years before the Voting Rights Act. So I've seen the changes in this country. In fact, being in Georgia and traveling to places like Alabama, Mississippi, when I was a kid, I saw very little black representation. So I think the gentleman is right here. Obviously, this act, the Voting Rights Act, was probably the most important piece of legislation in this country's history because it transformed America. When I go to Georgia now, I see black folks in every position, sheriffs, city council, mayors. So obviously it was a great piece of legislation. The problem is the country has changed. And I want to talk about what I think is a human component because I get a little tired of these maps and just single interest conversations. I think that's part of the problem. When you look at Texas in general, the growth has been fueled by different groups, not just Hispanics, but Hispanics, African Americans, and Asians. I think that's important. They mentioned Congressman Darby. The Voting Rights Act didn't say you just elect black people. It said that we should be free from discriminatory practices. I think that's an important distinction to make. Because there are folks out here who, regardless of race, are good representatives. I think that's important for America in 2011. Look at our president. So I think sometimes we see things from a too narrow perspective. The maps are good, but you have to also think about the human component. What does this process really mean when you talk about reapportionment or districting? Well, the country's changed. Unfortunately, in 2011, there's such a strong partisan fight in this country. The bigger issues are being lost. I mean, people are fighting over turf so much they're not considering what this act really means. What it means is, for the most part, most of us want fair, legitimate representation. Obviously, without this act in place, we wouldn't have what we have there in America. But I think there's a danger still because today, when you talk about gerrymandering, you're not talking about race, you're talking about political ideology, unfortunately. When you see folks trying to craft up maps because of political ideology, I have a major problem with that. I happen to think that, for example, that Congressman Darby is a great representative. And I would encourage people, while race is certainly a central component of this whole process, I think people's record speaks clearly as well. So I think we might want to be careful and just make sure we look at everything, race, people's records, the representation, what they've done. To me, it's quite ironic that 4 to 6 years ago, when the act was passed, and a fellow named LBJ, think about LBJ's Texas and think about what we have today. I get totally confused. How do we get from LBJ, a man who talked about Voting Rights Act and pretty much transformed this whole landscape, to a guy who I won't call his name, who seems to have no clue about anything, as far as I'm concerned. And that's not a partisan comment. But I do think, my concern is, our concern is in this process is that apparently it's become so politicized now. I think we've kind of lost our human advantage. Going back to the facts here, I think clearly when you look at the numbers here, what we're looking at is the fact, when you look at growth in Texas, where's that growth coming from? We have to address the growth where it is and make sure those folks get proper representation. You can't say, for example, you can't take the growth out of Houston and give it to somebody in West Texas. So there are certain games being played, things like, you mentioned planking and striking and cranking. All those terms are relevant 30, 40 years ago. Today it's a little more complicated. So we look at the growth in this state, we're trying to make sure that the growth is being addressed properly. And thank God there is a saving grace. I'm pretty sure that given this strong partisan divide in this state and this country, I don't see these guys being successful in coming up with a fair system. So I think maybe by default, we're going to wind up going somewhere else and getting it done the right way. And I'm glad that President Obama is in the White House. I think maybe him being there might be an incentive. It might be an incentive. But I still say, in this whole conversation, we need to have a human component that says, while we want to have a fair system, we also want to have great representation, good representation. And the racial component or cultural component sometimes I think is being manipulated too much. And I think there's a danger in that. The danger is at some point you even divide minorities, one against the other. So I think it's a little bigger than whether or not Hispanics have their way or have my way. Or I would encourage people to look at the maps and be fair, but at the same time, also think about who would represent your community best. And I do think there are folks out there like Congressman Doggett who I think sometimes are being singled out unfairly, who's done a great job. And I certainly like what he's done. I'm okay saying that. But once again, if you look at all the changes in this map in the state of Texas, you've got to make sure that you address the growth where it is and ensure that these new districts reflect the population. That's all we call for. And in that process, if you're black, brown, yellow, red, whatever, we want the best representative. I think that's a whole nother argument. And maybe in doing that in a sensible way, we can neutralize this strong, divisive, destructive, partisan divide. And I haven't heard that argument yet, but as the NAACP looks at this process, our position is a little different. We certainly embrace the voting rights act, but we think today, because of this political war in this country, in the state of Texas, that the gerrymandering is really based on political ideology. How do we really address that? I'm hoping that sensible leadership in the House and Senate comes forward and says, look, we can draw up a fair system. The bigger issue is, if you look at Texas right now, its policies, how it spends its resources, clearly black people and brown people are not being represented properly. So I think if you use these numbers the right way, when you increase those districts and representation, that definitely will have an impact. But I think there's a bigger picture here. That both these parties should do more to get beyond their own ideologies and look at the makeup of the state. Because if we don't have the state representing this population, we're in violation of not just the act itself, we're in violation of the Constitution. So I just hope that at some point, beyond the legal arguments, which to me are quite boring overall, that we bring in the human component, which is us looking at the condition of the state, which is a total mess from top to bottom, and trying to find people with good sense, good values, who respect all of our cultures, and come up with a fair system that leads the state in the right direction. Now, of course, that's being highly optimistic. But I'm trying very hard. So what I'm saying is as a black man, and dealing with a lot of Hispanics and other groups as well, I just think that we need to see things from a broader perspective and try to put good folks in the equation and come up with a fair solution, and also address and embrace the facts that the state is changing. It's going to change. You can't stop that. So the challenge is now, how do we come up with a map that fairly reflects that change in the right places without playing politics, as we always seem to. If we can't do it right, there is certainly the Department of Justice. They're watching this very closely. We're watching it very closely, but we're calling for basically having a system that allows us to pick our own representative regardless of race. And I know, again, I'm being a little optimistic, but I think I've got to say that because I'm hearing stuff right now that's targeting a lot of people who in many ways have done great jobs for everybody. And I think those folks should be recognized because they've been able to do it the right way. And I just want to again plug Mr. Dogger, because I've seen his work, and I'm not on his payroll. I don't work for him. I just like good representation. I think he's a great guy. And I just hope that in this process we get beyond race somewhat and talk about having a fair system that can begin to break this stranglehold that partisan divide has put in the state and in this country. And I think I'll stop there while I'm ahead.